have a plan, have a thesis, have a direction. I think the next one is don't be scared. You are going to make mistakes, and I think every mistake should be learning experiences. I think it's about execution. So don't spend too much time just planning. Think about executing, because that is through the learning path, test and learn. And then we have more opportunity to grow together and bring new opportunities to market. I'm Sabine VanderLinden, and this is the future of insurance.
This episode is brought to you by EIS Core Talk, a series of hot chats with insurance industry experts hosted by Evermore Digital's Ed Helsey. Subscribe at eisgroup.com/Core Talk and don't miss a single episode.
Sabine, thank you for joining me. It's great to sit down with you.
Thank you for having me, Brian.
We've been on a couple of things and talking in different meetings and stuff, but I haven't actually just gotten the one-on-one time to pick your brain and not have it be you picking mine too. I just want this to be about your thoughts, so it's good to sit down with you. Can you just kind of opening for folks who don't know you, which there might be one or two, but probably that's about it. I think most people would know you, but tell us a little bit about yourself, your background and what you do these days.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Sabine VanderLinden. I've been working in insurance for 25 years. I started my career at Lloyd's of London, actually. And I would say 6 years ago, I decided to move into the FinTech space. So work with a group of investors who asked me to look into one of their ventures. So I discovered FinTech 6 years ago. And then 5 years ago, I decided to be one of the first going into InsurTech. So that's probably why, I'm getting some of my names.
Yeah.
But through that process, I built very renowned acceleration programs. I accelerated over 100 ventures, helped them raise over 100 million in funding from investors. So my business model in recent years has been around working with insurers, so the incumbent side, the startups. So we have scouted probably over 20,000 ventures to date.
Wow.
And then the investors to help with deal flow and help startup find their best investors. Smart money, though.
Yeah.
And so recently I set up 2 years ago, Alchemy Crew, to take all this learning to start building an environment where we can industrialize, democratize, and hopefully monetize venture labs.
So is there a focus for you? Is it just P&C or P&C and life and health? Is it just Europe? Is it US? What sorts of things do you focus in on, or is it wide open?
So I work with many partners in Asia. I have partners in Europe and in the United States. So the insurance companies I work with are actually across 3 continents. Now, why do they want to work with us? It's because we probably have a global lens on InsurTech. We believe first in tech for insurance. So instead of looking at the 6,000 ventures, 20% of which have raised so far 53 billion in funding, we look at the million companies which could be useful for insurance. So I don't narrow my scope to just InsurTech. I look at technology relevant for industry. And then when you look at what they really want to know about Europe. And whether you look at the corporate himself or itself, looking for innovation, for sure there is a strong demand for the European startup, because we are really good at business model innovation.
Yeah.
But there's also demand for companies in other continents which can solve for the problem we are after.
It's really fascinating, the global lens. You definitely see people who focus in on either, it's North America or the US market because it's big, or Asia because there's so much wide open. Europe is complicated because every country is quite different as a market. I mean, there's similarities, but distribution is quite localized. You have different rules and regulations. People think EU, and so that means it's all standardized, but it isn't. I mean, maybe that helps with some licensure, but the tastes of each market, the way that they work, the culture of the markets is all different. Do you see that? Is Europe tricky, or is that the case everywhere, that you do need to think about the local nuances for any given solution or any given carrier?
I believe you need to think about the nuances regardless as to whether it's Europe or United States. You have 50 states and you have to reapply in every state. So I don't think it's that different. But also remember that in Europe still, if you actually develop a product for one market, you can actually push it into another market through this passporting and licensing agreement. They are amongst the different European markets. And this deal, despite Brexit, things are being worked around between the UK and European markets as well. However, I think when you look at the problem we are trying to solve for, so I always want to start with a complex problem. I try to usually avoid Horizon 1, too much process-driven stuff. So I prefer, when you look at sustaining innovation, which is about building new product and new services. And now we have great opportunities around emerging risk, which requires rethinking the insurance product or business models. Think about sustainability, right? You need to look at circular economy. You have to look at service models. You have to look at ecosystem models. So that is probably a little bit more sexy and a bit more interesting as well for me. However, when you look at what corporates and insurers are trying to do, is I have a problem. I need to sort out that problem with a variety of means. Either I want to partner with ventures, and I want to invest in them so that I have a stake in them. And sometimes this is easier than the partnership route, or I may want to acquire it. So we're trying to work alongside players who have very clear outcomes. And then we come on that journey to provide them with capabilities, tools, and techniques to accelerate their ability to find the right partners or the right investment opportunities or acquisition opportunities within our network, and using the 25 years of experience in insurance I've acquired over time.
I'm curious about Asia, because we don't hear, at least in North America, we don't hear a lot about it, but there are some really interesting things going on there that I think, actually, I would say Asia and Africa, I think there are things happening in how insurance is distributed, how products, you're talking about new risk, what kinds of products are being created and how they're being packaged into other products and micro insurance, all these buzzwords that are going around, they are happening in those markets. Are you seeing things from what you're seeing going on in Asia in particular that you think have the potential to become global products, or versus, there's reasons why it's done what it's doing in Asia and will stay there and not be adopted in Western Europe or the US?
I think the learning we are gaining from the lack of WeChat and social media platform as to how they're engaging with their customer base. I can see a number of insurers asking me a lot about social media marketing and selling. So that is definitely one topic we are talking a lot about. However, when you look at the insurers and the companies that tend to be involved with in those markets, they tend to want to look at underserved segments. So I'm really fortunate in the sense that I'm not always looking at the existing customer they are going after, but they are trying to disrupt themselves with going for really sub-markets within the Gen Z market, for instance, or addressing the issues around the elderly, using Internet of Things and capabilities, which mean that instead of going into care homes, people can stay at home, as an example. When you look at Gen Z, it's about understanding how sub-segment within the Gen Z, me as a woman, for instance, how do I interact and how do I want to engage with products and services to start with, and how insurance may fit into that. What I love the most is some of the companies I engage with, maybe life insurers or health insurers, trying to invent themselves. So life asking you about health insurers asking you about P&C, commercial lines insurers asking me for green sustainability. So you're actually seeing a much more Horizon 3 thinking and using me much more as an R&D lab, an environment where they can find ideas to refine strategy and decide what to do next. Now, when you look at Africa, which was one of your questions, I think we still have so much to learn around macro servicing. Okay, we are lucky that we have smartphones, but a lot of people in Africa are still using feature phones.
Mhm.
And the insurers who have spent the time and effort to really understand that customer journey and using QR codes to actually enable people to buy insurance, actually learning a lot as to how they can bring some of that thinking even in developed markets to actually attract and become much more, I would say resilient, but also much more attractive to younger generations.
Yeah.
So we can learn from Asia, we can learn from Africa. And I think another point around Europe being in between means that with so many countries with different currencies, and for sure we'll see it as the euro, but different cultures mean that if you want to differentiate, you can't be isolated. You have to look at what is happening around you on the US side and on the HS side, which means for me that what you find is a lot of business model innovation happens in Europe.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Europe and the UK in particular, as I think about distribution, the UK has had bank assurance and aggregators and all those sorts of things long before the US did. And anytime we've tried, aggregators are gaining traction here, but bank assurance has been a total failure in the US. I mean, that was the Travelers Citigroup merger, or Citicorp at the time, was around that, and it didn't work. So, but yet in the UK, it has worked. And you have, I mean, even Tesco is a distributor of insurance in the UK. There's certain things that are, I think, very interesting going on that you could say, oh, that'll transmit, but then there's others that maybe they just don't apply because of the cultural bit. And it's hard to sort out which one is a which, right? Which ones will and won't.
Yeah. Well, culture. Well, think about Germany and France. Very dependent on brokers and very strong distribution. My dad would not buy insurance without talking to his bank, actually.
Yeah.
So I remember when I was a kid, I would sit with him in the bank. We would talk about the whole year of financing and insurance. Whilst in the UK, as you know, a very, very competitive market. And for commercial, for personal lines product, what you find is a high dependency on direct and digital channel, even though they may be brokers, but they are much more transparent channels for the buyers. So, and because of this, I think that's why the UK potentially, from a digitization viewpoint, probably pushed along more, because the customer has been asking for that transparency, the same as they have been asking for Amazon and Netflix, touch button access to things. And so what you find as well from an innovation viewpoint, 14% of the startups in Europe are in the United Kingdom, 5% in Germany and 5% in France. So that also, I think, pushing innovation, right? And young companies wanting to demonstrate how they can disrupt that customer engagement and that distribution capability as well. That's
an interesting stat, since Germany is so much bigger than the UK from an economic activity standpoint. Oh, that's really interesting. 3 times the startup activity in the UK, nearly 3 times. Yeah.
And, I know we don't have, we have a few unicorns, and we know we have great WeFox as unicorn in Germany, and we have quite interesting unicorns, but still, I think, in terms of numbers, UK still have more unicorns in Europe than the other great markets, also pushing along to bring their unicorns to market.
Yeah. Technically, France has Shift now, since that is still a French, it's a French company.
But the team has been spending, I'm French myself, but the team has spent a lot of time in London.
So I'm trying to give you credit.
A little bit of credit, yes, because the Shift team came to some of my events 5 years ago, right, and met a lot of the
early days for them.
I was working. Yes, indeed.
They've been great. They've been one of the sponsors of the show. But so I want to think a little bit about, we've talked about some of the things that are brewing today and the why behind a lot of it. What are, you and I have talked about some 2022 things. What are some of the things that you think are maybe the seeds are being planted right now, and it's something that we're going to experience the next 2-3 years, or maybe some of the longer term things? Where do you see things heading? What do you think will pop up for us as an industry?
I think there is going to be probably a bit more interest from business model viewpoint around, the subscription business model. So all the things we talk about and around as a service, but platform as a service, services as a service. When I look at some of the big themes I'm going to dive into in 2022, which already started in 2020, actually, like sustainability, we are going to start looking more closely at the circular economy business model and, its applicability in insurance. So how we become circular, how do we upcycle, repurpose, recycle things, even for things which are linked to insurance. One big conversation I've had with a number of insurers here recently was around just basic car insurance and replacement parts. Can we use 3D printed parts? And could we therefore demonstrate that we can gradually move to a much more sustainable and recycling based business model? Others we are talking about, I think, which I think are going to become more and more prevalent in 2022, is what I call digital ecosystem. And you've probably seen a number of articles popping up. One of these conversations said, well, Sabine, this is platformification, or is it digital ecosystem? I put everything in digital ecosystem, and then you can have sub-themes around those. So think about Prudential Pulse. I think it's a super app, right? It's a platform, but they have built a digital ecosystem working with startups alongside their value chain to service clients in different markets. And some of the ventures, the startup they are working with, are involved in every Asian market and some only in specific Asian market. So there is customization and personalization as well to provide that unique experience. But then when you start looking at the digital ecosystem we have experienced in the past, I would call Mini Crew Digital Partners a digital ecosystem, one of our first, or the Accelerator I built for the past 6 years. They are a form of digital ecosystems. What you will find is that balance between having companies working together, bringing new skills to the ecosystem, and then new things as well to use. And then as we serve for customer requirements, what we'll see is people with the strengths, will master their strength, and people will replace weaknesses with new partners in their ecosystem to start servicing the client much faster. What you'll find is the node, what I call the node owners, potentially will have different benefits, right? Either you're like a master of all nodes, the maestro and orchestrator, or you're just a small community provider. And I think what you'll find is seeing ways as to how to make this work better. Wacom, I think, is for me one of the most recent one around digital ecosystems. And then the last one I would probably want to talk about is, this topic we are all talking about without really understanding what it means. But it's around product and services. So I mentioned emerging risk, but we talk a lot about embedded. And I think whether it's embedded finance, embedded insurance, embedded distribution, embedded API, there is these embedded things around how do we serve the client better without the client being flustered and annoyed with us because there is friction in the engagement. So for me, embedded is about removing friction and delivering the customer demand better. Some of those services will be delivered by you and I, and some may be delivered by others.
This node notion, I see that playing out in embedded as well. I mean, of course, if you have like an ecosystem, you can be embedding different solutions into that. There's two really strong schools of thought that you mentioned, or different paths to be a strong central node and you own everything and all the money has to come back to you versus sort of providing the ecosystem for others to come into and being more of a quiet behind the scenes, just make it work. And do you have a sense of whether one of those is the right path, or why one might make more sense than another, or what kinds of players would lean more one way or the other?
I think for someone to want to be an orchestrator or an ecosystem builder, you have to think differently. You have to break mindsets. You can't be selfish. You have to be selfless. and understand that actually to make money, you don't need to make all the money, because actually 1% of 100 million is different from 1% of 1 billion. So if you're actually hitting the 1 billion as an ecosystem player, you can make more money than trying to play on your own. So I think there is going to be a mindset shift and acceptance that one cannot do everything oneself. On the other part, which is I think more on the platform thinking, is okay, I want to be part of the new world, maybe embedding services. And as you think in terms of platform, which for me is probably more US thinking, which is much more tech driven, much more probably platform driven, then you can actually have a master of ceremony, puppeteering, managing others. I think I personally probably prefer the former than the latter, but I think both marketplace, let's say, could work. And it's at the end of the day, it will be about trust, right? It will be about how you build competency to make sure everybody in that network understand your vision and want to work with you. The platform one is definitely one could be interesting to develop, but for me, probably can be a longer route to market than gathering a group of people with strong competencies and happy to go together to deliver on a specific outcome. But we'll see, Brian, we'll see.
Well, I think the fact that these ideas that you're talking about are what you're looking at going forward. It's interesting if we go back as you were starting in the space, 5-6 years ago, it was more about here's some hot tech and let's all focus about that. Like it was blockchain, it was drones, it was AI or whatever. And blockchain's still not really here, not in insurance. There's some applications, absolutely, and it still has promise, but it was, I remember, and I've said this a few times in different episodes, but drones, early days, like mid-teens, everyone in claims was scared of them. Like, yes, it could be helpful and I won't have a job anymore because of drones. With what you're talking about, you're not naming a specific technology. You're talking about sort of a strategic mindset on how we want to approach an opportunity and where we want to position ourselves and how we want to partner or not, and how we want to access the market or not. It's more about the strategy than distributed ledger technology. It wasn't a single thing.
No, absolutely, Brian. I mean, my view is, technology still remains enablers, very important enablers, but they're still enablers. You still have to, whether you think in terms of corporate venture capital environment within a corporate or a VC, one will look at an innovation thesis, the other one is going to look at investment thesis. Both will have to have a path to go somewhere. That path is not predicted based on technology. They are based on customer needs. So for me, we need to start thinking about market, customer needs, and then I tend to look at it in terms of, okay, so where is the opportunity? Where is the money going? Because that is your quick wins. And yes, then I said, okay, some of the things will be blockchain links, IoT, and therefore linked to, so big data, IoT, therefore linked to the AI. The AI then, for volume, you need the quantum computing and the edge computing, and then you start looking at your digital twins and how we address cyber. So then you can list the technology, right? You can solve for all the things you've been trying to map within your thesis. But you need to start with the thesis. You need to start breaking it into subcomponents, which are manageable. And then you're looking for the enablers, right? Mobile first environment requires therefore A, B, and C, which are technology led, right? Not old world, new world. And that's where I start looking at startups and enablers to start building for the future. Often what I say to insurance companies is, you don't need to do it yourself. My motto is, why not partner rather than build? And then when you actually go to the next phase of the conversation, we say, okay, so if we want to build X, right, we want to serve for, women health, for instance. So how do we disrupt the women health market? You will need partly a completely reinvented distribution, completely reinvented proposition, which is linked to completely different distribution, which requires a digital first, mobile first way of thinking to capture data and access the customer base, would then require a variety of capabilities, whether it's, responsive underwriting or, real-time claims management. Then you start looking at the capabilities. Some may be delivered internally by large players. Some are better off being served by young ventures because they already have thought about it very, very thoroughly in some ways.
Yeah. And then the go-to-market, I mean, do you partner with someone on the social media side who has that market segment versus, I see carriers, health insurers who set up their portal for women's health or for elder care or whatever. And it's like, that's fine, but there was a thriving community here that people are engaged with. Why do you think they're going to come to you when it's just about insurance to them? It's a different mindset, partnering.
Completely.
Yeah,
absolutely. We've done a piece of study for one of our partners where we looked at some of the engagement strategies for specific communities of segments through social media. Fascinating. Yeah. And it requires a lot of thought, a lot of, I don't think the budget needs to be very high, but I think there is a lot of thought which needs to be put into the strategy. It's not short term. It has to be thought long term to actually acquire, as you said, those communities and actually have the impact that can yield, product purchase and servicing. And I find that fascinating because often the organization we work with in our environment are still very scared of social media.
Yeah. Sometimes for good reason, sometimes not. Depends what's going on. Sabine, this has been a lot of fun. Is there anything before we go, any parting thoughts or wisdom you would leave with the audience to think about how they can bring change and forethought into their organization? As you say, have a thesis, have a plan, have a direction.
Have a plan, have a thesis, have a direction. I think the next one is don't be scared. You are going to make mistakes, and I think every mistake should be learning experiences. I think it's about execution. So don't spend too much time just planning. Think about executing, because that is through the learning path, test and learn, that you can actually adjust. Usually what we say to our partners is, we need to go through 8 to 12 week cycles. Let's just not try to boil the ocean, but let's just be clean and clear that it's 8 to 12 month cycle. If we can get into that, then we have more opportunity to grow together and bring new opportunities to market. So a speedy learning experience would be my parting words.
Yeah. 8 to 10 weeks, not 8 to 10 months. Yeah, that's something, or 8 plus 10 months. So that's a big shift for our industry. Let's think about that. That 18-month cycle. I was talking to a carrier and they just said, well, that's the way we work. It's like, let's not accept that. If we can do differently and move forward, we can't. 18 months you're irrelevant in 18 months on that particular issue when your competitors are doing things in 8 to 10 weeks. So that's it's a good challenge. And I challenge us, we can all do it because we did it early days of lockdowns when everyone went virtual, and they said that would take months and months, and it took days. So you can do it. Sabine, really, really good to sit down with you. Thank you so much for the thoughts today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me, Brian.
Fantastic to sit down with Sabine. She's amazing. So smart, so clear on the things that are going on in the industry, how to bring them together, how to move ourselves forward. And she's in the midst of so many of the different pockets of the industry where some really interesting things are going on in P&C and health and life in different geographies. As she mentioned, I love getting time with Sabine, and I'm lucky to get to do that. Yes, in this episode, but more broadly. But always a huge thank you to Sabine for making herself available. You should follow her. If you don't, I've said this with a couple other people. She is one of those my go-to list when people are like, who should I be following to stay smart on this stuff? Sabine is absolutely one of like 5 people that without hesitation, I always tell people to follow. So follow her on LinkedIn and beyond on other platforms as well, Twitter as well. I'll link to all of that in the show notes. But thank you again to Sabine and to the Alchemy Crew for giving her up for a while. Thank you to the team at EIS for sponsoring this episode. You should check out Core Talk, hosted by Ed Halsey, with Tony Grosso co-hosting. It's hilarious. I was lucky enough to be a guest. They poke some fun at me, which is always good fun. But it's brilliant, and actually talk about some really interesting things that we need to get into for the industry. So thank you to EIS for sponsoring this episode and for putting their show out, because it's great. All right, with that, I will let everybody go. Make sure you are subscribed to this show, whether that's on YouTube or Apple Podcasts or Spotify or Stitcher or Google Podcasts or whatever platform you listen to this on or watch this on. Subscribe, don't miss an episode. And that way, you know, you won't miss next week's episode. And I will see you, or you'll hear me next time for that. Thanks, everyone.